Welcome back to this episode of Flux Navigators. You are tuning into part 2 of my conversation with Sanjay Sharma. We left off in the last episode when Sanjay was about to dive deep into marginal media, their plans, and what makes them tick. And we're about to continue right there where we left off, so let's get right into it. Before we get into today's episode, here's a disclaimer about the sound. The soundtrack on the episode is somewhat suboptimal, especially my sound, not so much Sanjay's sound. We messed up a little bit on the settings, and it's something we've taken care of for future episodes, but you may hear that the sound's a little unclear on my end, but I can guarantee you the episode is so great, and the conversation with Sanjay is so great that you're not even going to notice it 5 minutes into the episode, so stick around.
A little over 3 years ago, I decided to leave and take another run at Marginal, because in the time that we had, begun and started All Def, that 3-year period, it wasn't that long actually. It was I think literally about 3 years, maybe a little less. The market had just changed so dramatically that many of the things I had been kind of hypothesizing in my V1 Marginal pitch had happened, right? So, and I had, my old pitch deck, which was like this, the studios will consolidate and, streaming will run away with the ball. It's, new entrants will come into the streaming business. And I had this slide that had Apple, Amazon, and eBay, right? And in the first iteration, literally people laughed at that slide, right? Apple, eBay, are you crazy jumping into the streaming business? Like, what are you smoking, right? And so 2 out of 3, eBay still never launched a premium programming initiative, but obviously Apple and Amazon did, right? And the cultural thesis that we as people of color or others of all kinds, right, that fringe cultures, subcultures, international cultures, diaspora cultures are the creators of cool, right? The coolest shit happens at the margins, right? And so that's where the name of the company comes from. It's a Toni Morrison quote, actually, which is, "I choose to hang in the margins and let the center look for me." And that was sort of, it felt like people were starting to whisper around, diversity as an issue, right? This is still pre Black Lives Matter. This is pre, it's pre the last few years of sort of overt, talking about and interested in diversity and equity and inclusion. But I felt a strong conviction that this conversation would happen, and that either we would force it to happen or that it would happen on its own, and we'd be well positioned to take advantage of that, right? So we began about a little over 3 years ago, and the kind of 3 pillars of the company were technology, first and foremost, will massively dislocate the traditional storytelling industries. Streaming, audio, other new technologies, now what we would describe as like the blockchain and Web3, that global demographics, psychographics, immigration patterns, and just the composition of the world would create a different dynamic for what kinds of stories were considered to have value or not have value. And third, a creative filter around this that was less rooted in kind of the traditional Hollywood approach to, call it, diversity or multiculturalism, which is typically focused on sort of prestige drama or identity-rooted projects, right? And look, we're film nerds and cinephiles, so we like all of those kinds of projects. But I sort of looked at the landscape and said, what about commercial genre? Specifically, horror, thriller, sci-fi, stoner comedy, buddy comedy, bank heist movies, road trip movies, movies that we all grew up loving and watching, whether you grew up in the States or whether you grew up in India, right? And never saw ourselves in, and certainly could never have dreamed to be the authors of, right? And so I said, what if we use as our sort of guiding principle stories where identity is a prism, but is not the plot, right? And so that's sort of what we like. We like stories that can normalize otherness, and we like stories that allow creators to use identity as a liberating function and not a limiting or all-defining function, right? Yeah.
I love it. And it's funny that when in our Bang Bang pitch deck, because we've got to explain what we're doing, we've got three comparables in there just in terms of companies that are broadly in the same space in terms of their thinking. One of them is, and through different lenses, right? One could be because it's about sort of India, South Asia, et cetera. So there's the juggernaut, there's macro, right? And, and then there's marginal. I don't know if you do this. And this
I did not know that.
Way before I knew you.
I did not know that. Wow.
So we have that in there. And so very clearly your messaging is working because even before I knew you, just from, oh, this is an interesting company. Oh, this guy sounds interesting. What are they up to? Kind of really getting into that and seeing what you guys are up to. I was like, yeah, this is great. This is kind of what we're saying, but from a different angle.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So it's working.
That's amazing. That's a good company to keep because, Charles King, who's the founder of Macro, is an amazing kind of rock star of a guy. And then Snigdha, who's founded the Juggernaut, is also a rock star. So that's good. That's good to be mentioned in good company. When people ask me when I started, if I was trying to copy Macro, which, it'd be an honor to be able to do that, but I'm not arrogant enough to think I could do that. Also, they're doing a great job at that, right? So I would usually say it's more like if Blumhouse and Gimlet had a mixed race baby.
Oh my God. I think a lot of our listeners will get that. I think that's hilarious.
Great. An American horror company and an American premium scripted fiction audio company.
Brilliant. What's your deal with Imagine? When did they get involved with Marginal?
So basically the first, call it year, 9 months, call it alpha, was me kind of, self-financed company and basically did research, right? What's the hypothesis? What's the validation around it? Talked to creative people, writers, actors, directors, executives, politicians, poets, anyone and everyone to sort of just bounce the idea of the company around, right? Sometimes you have these ideas, you're an entrepreneur and you think they're brilliant, and then you talk to people and they're like, no, that's not good. Right? Nobody wants that, right? So I always ask, like, is anyone asking for this, right? And so once I felt a pretty good conviction that people were asking for it, I started it, and we started to get our hands on our first few projects. My friends at Rain, the investment bank and merchant banking firm Rain, who
Joe Ravitch and
yeah, that's right, exactly. Joe Ravitch, and then an awesome guy named Eric Hodge who runs their entertainment and media practice and is based in LA. I'd met him I'd met him earlier, I think in All Def days, and the Rain and investment firm were small investors in Machinima. And so he had been asking me kind of, what are you doing? What are you working on? And I sent him the deck for Marginal from 3-4 years ago, right? I said, this is the last thing I was trying to do, but it was an abysmal failure. And he looked at it and was like, the timing for this is now, right? And so they're probably the best in the business, and he was good enough to introduce me to Brian and Ron at Imagine, and then they came in as our first sort of seed investors, so our seed one, and helped incubate the company and helped kind of stand it up, and were my back office and creative partners. Developed a bunch of things on our own, like we're always a standalone company, and then developed a bunch of things together with them. The first one or two will hopefully be coming out relatively soon. And so did that for a year through this incubation, almost tried to mimic. They're super entrepreneurial folks, and so tried to mimic what an accelerator program, like a venture accelerator, might look like, right? So that ended in probably 2019. And then, and we were off to the races. We haven't talked about this yet, but we'll do so a little more publicly later. But just finished up a second seed, and so just continuing to grow the company. It's still very lean, small, small but mighty. It's now 3 years in. Of course, when we left that incubation period to go into our beta, the pandemic hit, right? And so, difficult time to be launching company that's ostensibly focused on film and television. But honestly, in a lot of ways, the pandemic sort of validated many of our hypotheses, right? It sort of bore out two things in particular. One, overdependence on the on the theatrical studio system is very risky unless you're the biggest players in the world, right? Making the biggest movies in the history of filmed entertainment. Two, streamers were just everyone hard pivoting to direct to consumer, right? And actually, there's a third, which is the conversation around racial justice and equity, right? Which all happened over the last couple of years. And so suddenly the idea of like, wait, so you've already been at work developing projects for kind of a global pipeline that are culturally specific, all rooted in, people of color or the queer community or the immigrant community or the disability community, all commercial and in genre, and all actionable on sub 10, sub $5 million, but not $150 million studio movies, but things that could be made on like an engine, right? That suddenly became an interesting proposition, whereas just 3 years earlier, I was told emphatically that it was not a business. Right?
I actually think you're understating it, because the pandemic, it's not just thesis validation. I think it's thesis validation on steroids, in terms of what you put forward and how that's validated it. One of the things you said, which I'm curious for my own knowledge and for anyone else who's sort of building any form of production company or business venture in the entertainment space in this era of the decentralization of Hollywood, is how do you define, you mentioned you were in alpha and then you moved to beta. So what was the difference between alpha and beta in this context?
Good question. I mean, I'm not really using them in the kind of classic like Valley tech company. So I'm, this in many ways, this is a content company, right? At the end of the day, right? But I'm sort of applying the learnings and practices of, what I've done in tech, right? And so trying to create a company that has a different culture and DNA and try to grow a company in a different kind of way in this industry, right? So I knew that I would not be able to start a film and TV company in Hollywood to beat Hollywood incumbents, right? I'm nobody in Hollywood. I'm not as well capitalized as the big players in Hollywood. I don't have agents who will just return my call, and I'm not in the club, right? And so to be, and by the way, I don't really want to be in that. Like I'm not. That's not the goal, right?
Welcome to the club of not being in the club.
Right. See, it's where the best people are, outside the club. And did you see the Super Bowl, by the way? You saw 50 Cent in the club. Sorry. The epic halftime show. But so I knew if we were going to take a run at this, we would have to do it in a different way, right? And we wanted to do it in a different way because we want to show Hollywood that it can be, and we want to show other entrepreneurs and creative people, you don't have to conform to that. You can stay in the margins and do it this way, right? And so I sort of said, what would this look like if you started it like a tech company? And so you'll have a stage one, call it alpha, where you're kind of getting hypothesis validation and research. Stage two, beta, is like minimum viable product, right? And so in beta, I wanted to see, and I think we're still in beta, maybe close to coming out of beta. I wanted to see if on a very minimal amount of capital, can we do this? Can we get creative people to trust us with their projects? Can we package it? Can we develop, improve, and package those projects? Can we help raise independent financing around those projects? Can we sell projects to streamers and get distribution? Can we get projects that are great quality and that premiere at festivals and win the sort of traditional validators according to the film and TV business? And if we can do that with no money, right? That was what I sort of said would be proof of minimum viable product, right? Because there's, and you know this, and it's probably true in India as well. I think it's true in most filmed entertainment markets. Money is really a big differentiating factor, right?
Absolutely.
And so if you have capital, agents will send you material because they know you can write checks, right? And so I was like, well, what does that really prove? And so if I'd raised, $50 million to start the company, yeah, we'd get immediately plugged into the slipstream. Every agent's returning your call. Everyone's sending you hot scripts, right? The book agent's sending you the manuscript. This is going to be on the New York Times bestseller list in 2 weeks, right? But like, so what? You're just competing against other well-capitalized players to write a big check, right? And so I sort of said, let's do the opposite. When we meet with people, we're going to tell them we don't have any money, right? We don't have any money, right? That's not the differentiating factor. That's not what you get when you work with us. We might be able to go help you get money, but what we do is we're creative producers, right? And we have a different code and a different DNA. And when we say something, we do it. And when we say something, we mean it. And when we shake hands, we have a deal, right? Like we just operate differently. And when you can get creative people to say, instead of optioning this to player X for $1,000 or $5,000, I'm going to give it to you for free because I trust you, right? And I believe your vision aligns with my vision, that your intention is the same as mine, that your mission and DNA are something I can get behind. I'm going to trust you with that, right? And now we just chip away at it like startups do, right? Just singles and doubles. And now in 3 years, we can say we've helped make 6 movies, and every single one of them has premiered at a major film festival or been or sold into distribution. Last year alone, we have a movie on in 2021 on HBO Max, on Amazon, on Hulu. Each of them have been nominated for at least one, if not more than one award. Each of them premiered at festival. So we can say it's not once, it's not twice, it's not a 6 out of 6 is not bad.
Actually, but tell us what they are for our listeners.
Oh, sure. So we have a movie on Hulu. I'm not sure if it's internationally available or not, but I think it is.
Hulu's barely internationally available.
Yeah, right. So that one may not be. That one's called The Obituary of Tyndae Johnson. It is a time loop thriller that tackles LGBTQ issues and police violence, but it does it through a genre convention of a time loop thriller. First time Nigerian American writer named Stanley Kalu wrote the script in his senior year at college. And a brilliant director named Ali Leroy, who had been a very successful and is a very successful television director. And yet this is his first feature film. Right?
What's his name again?
Ali Leroy. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one of them that's nominated for a GLAAD award this year for best indie film. There's a movie on HBO Max right now called The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain, which stars an American icon, Frankie Faison, a brilliant character actor who's, he's one of the, if you see him, you're like, oh, that guy, right? And finally, Frankie is getting his flowers. He won a Gotham Award for Best Actor. He tied with Olivia Colman. So kind of, pretty big win. And the movie's nominated for 2 Indie Spirit Awards and an NAACP Image Award for Best Indie Film. And then the third one is a movie that we did. Our biggest is a movie we did with Blumhouse and Amazon. So that's streaming on Amazon Prime now. Latinx thriller called Madres. And is perfect kind of example of what we're all about. It's first time Latina feature writer, first time Latino feature director. So again, all of these people, we're just expanding the ecosystem and the pipeline, getting people their first credits, their second credits, getting people who the traditional industry might say, well, we'd like to bet on them, but they don't have any credits, right? Well, now they have a credit, right? And so expanding that pipeline, and that movie is a supernatural, it's a ghost story, it's a horror thriller, but it's rooted in, I won't spoil it for anyone, but it's rooted in an actual historical event, right? And so you learn the sort of like social justice angle that is revealed through the movie, but it's not done through a drama period piece. It's done through a Rosemary's Baby style horror movie, right? And so that one is also up for an NAACP Image Award this year too. So yeah,
Nice. You're excessively modest when you talk about what you've done, and then and then you get into the details of it, and you realize, man, he was being excessively modest. So I think you guys have done a kick-ass job. And also, why I wanted you to describe these, and it's really good because you understand, the thesis behind Marginal, what you did, in terms of going. I would say you're at least my feedback from the outside is that you've crossed MVP stage. So,
yeah, I hope so. Well, so and this year, we have our next movie is going to premiere at South by on the opening day of South by, and so yeah, hopefully, it's it's a difficult industry, as you know, right? And so the incumbents and the decision makers it's very much like a club, right? It's the same 200-300 people, and there's a lot of legacy. There's a lot of trading relationships that are nearly etched in stone, and it's hard to crack into that, right? And so the hope is that at some point people say, okay, that's one. Okay, that's two. Okay, that's three. Okay, the next one's at South by. Okay, when's your next? Like it starts to just build up through singles and doubles. Either we keep doing it outside the system, or people inside the system start saying, hey, could you do 6 movies a year for us? Could you do, and that's when we'll be at kind of the next stage for the company.
It's interesting what you just said a minute ago, which is, sort of trying to break into the club from various angles. You keep chipping away, and that actually is possibly the number one item on my job description list, which is to kind of keep chipping away to break in, and not necessarily to break in and be a part of it, but to break in and bring what you have to the table. Now, whether you want to be part of it or what the club really looks like 5 years from now, that we'll see, right? But it's just about getting in there, and that's what you keep doing through using different arrowheads, using different arrows in your equipment, or different sort of tools in your arsenal, whatever it is. That's what we're doing.
I was gonna share more about some of the other things that we're doing. So that's on the like features side, and now there's a kind of robust pipeline. I can't talk about several of, we'll be announcing some of these soon, but we've got a pretty robust pipeline now, probably 24 feature films in various stages of development, from early idea still being kind of sketched out and written, to written, packaged, ready to take to the market. A lot of them are they're all kind of in this vein. We have our first international projects. So we have our first horror movie that's set in India, local language thriller that I've been writing with this guy, Bilal Siddiqui, who you might know, Bilal, who wrote the Netflix India series Bard of Blood. Awesome young writer who's just killing it and super prolific. The guy sleeps like 2 hours a night. And so, so that's kind of exciting to just be expanding that footprint outside of the US. And then we sold our first TV show to Amazon last year. So that's in development there. We're about to, soon we'll announce we've sold our first animated series. So we're, we'll officially be entering animation this year and have, a handful of animated projects that are ready to take out to the market later this year. And we've been doing a lot in audio. As you know, like you love this medium. I haven't started hosting my own podcast yet. But when I do, I'll have to have you on as a guest. But yeah, we've been doing a bunch of work in scripted fiction in audio. And then we have a first nonfiction series that we're starting to, put together and take out to the market, and our first sort of conversational series. We're releasing one soon. That's young podcaster, young guy here in the States who is just a film, TV, anime, superhero, sneaker nerd, and has just a great voice and an encyclopedic understanding of that pop culture market. And so we're going to get behind him and help him blow up his podcast. So, growing kind of across this spectrum of film, TV, series, animation, audio, and soon in Web3, or what I call crypto native IPs. So it's busy. It's a good time. So
have beautifully laid out the segue to talk about Web3, because that's what I was going to get to. We did say we were going to come back to that earlier in the conversation. Look, you are a 4 out of 10, as you say. I am a 2 out of 10 on this. So I'm going to throw it over to you to kind of talk about, and look, I don't want to make it too long for our listeners, but just sort of, how do you look at this in terms of, and we already touched on a few things, but I'm particularly interested, and I've been reading about DAOs, or if people are not even a 2, but more at a 1 or a 0 on this scale. DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations, which really are these fascinating structures of coming together for a specific purpose or mission, and are a lot more flexible, malleable, and extendable, or could even be short-term, as compared to any corporate structures that really exist in the non Web3 world. And they're all sort of run on the blockchain and governed by specific rules and smart contracts, etc., between the members. So I don't know. My definition is sort of, I just hacked it, but I think that kind of covers it. So how do you look at, I've been trying to get my head around, and it's not a unique thing. There's already, there's something called the Hollywood DAO. There's something else, which I think the Coppola family is involved with as well. There's a few different initiatives in this space to bring the DAO model to entertainment. Have you thought about that? What do you think about that? And how do you see this evolving and the impact on the business?
So I've been spending a fair bit of time on it and thinking about it. Not necessarily DAOs specifically, but the kind of broader, call it crypto or blockchain landscape. And so, I do think that DAOs will play a key role in that. I haven't followed super closely the specific DAOs in Hollywood, which are sometimes around picking movies to finance and things like that. I always look at, when I look at projects on the blockchain, I always am first interested in, why does this need to be on the blockchain? What attributes does the project have that make it uniquely suited for, call it the Web3 environment? And is it something that lends itself to be unique to, or materially improved by being on the blockchain, right? And so if it doesn't, then it kind of feels like, wait, if this could just be done, call it the old-fashioned way, like, why can't this be done on a website, right? Like, and then you quickly kind of sift out the projects that, in my view, and again, this is all fast evolving. Those are the projects where someone might have thought, oh, this is more clever if I say it's a crypto project than a regular internet project, right? So I kind of start there. The DAOs or decentralized communities that you're talking about, I think many of them have real reasons to work better on the blockchain, right? And those are interesting, right? But if it's kind of like, hey, we'll get a bunch of fans of movies together and vote on movies we like, it's like, okay, you can do that on Letterboxd, right? Like that's Rotten Tomatoes, or that's there's plenty of kind of communities where people can like vote on movies, right? So some of those things, again, I do think more and more things will gravitate to that environment almost as a computing protocol, just like we look at the internet as a protocol. But those aren't the ones that I'm kind of most interested in or spend most of my time on. We are, we as a company are developing, what I call crypto native IPs. So part of the whole thesis of the company was, if you started a content studio in 2025, what would it look like? What would the core competencies be? What media and format would you be expert in? How would you find, evaluate, incubate, and distribute or monetize content outside of the traditional entertainment industry, right? And that's what I'm most excited about with the blockchain. And so, we have a handful of crypto native IPs that are with pretty material people, a major recording artist, a major TV showrunner, a major brand, all in very different kind of cultural subcultures, right? And all very different creatively, aesthetically, and tonally. And they'll all be incubated in slightly different ways, right? So one might be incubated as a generative art project, and we're seeing the individual Bored Apes are spawning their own business ecosystems. One is being licensed a lot for like these cannabis brands, because when you buy a Bored Ape NFT, you own it, you can do what you want with it. We're sort of interested in, what if you incubated Star Wars or the girl with the dragon tattoo or SpongeBob or like any of these iconic franchises, but you incubate them in this path. And it's not that different from things that started as graphic novels or as other visual medium. But you align now a lot of the players in the ecosystems whose interests should be aligned, and in theory are aligned, namely creators and consumers, right? And so if you were, a fan of Star Wars and you've spent a lot of money on Star Wars Legos and Star Wars movies and posters, and if you're a parent, you have spent a lot of money on Star Wars, right? But you've never been an owner of Star Wars, right? You don't own the IP, you don't own the franchise, you get no royalties back. It's sort of like, I don't know if you guys have something like REI. Do you know REI here?
Yeah.
It's like a outdoors company.
Yeah.
But it's like a collective co-op type thing, right? And so you buy stuff at REI, and every year at the end of the year you get like $8 back. So it's like even REI gives you money for being a good customer, right?
Hey, I've never gotten. I bought a lot of stuff in REI. I never got anything back. I don't know.
Really?
Why.
You should.
Yeah.
Oh, you should, yeah. Maybe it's going to the wrong address.
Maybe it's because I don't live in the US, and okay.
Oh, maybe you should check that out. We always get a few bucks back.
It's like the Discovery Fund.
yeah, right. But that's where we have a lot of interest in the blockchain, right? And it's still early days. It feels like, oh my God, it's already taken off, but it's still early days. I don't call it Wild West, because that sort of makes it seem like there's no rules. And I think for people who are new to it, it kind of scares people. There are rules. In fact, it is it's like computer code. So a lot of this is like transparent and publicly available and auditable. And so in a weird way, there's more transparency and rules than the traditional internet, or certainly Web 2.0, right? And so I think it's really interesting. And the details of like which of these projects do we, which layer one protocols, which tokens, which platforms or exchanges do we sell different NFTs around these projects on? Like we're talking to different partners about different projects on all of those things. And that's where the really the rubber meets the road, as they say, right? And that is, there's a lot of players, right? And so some are better than others at different things. The community around different tokens is different. So, depending on the project, you might find that, Solana is the right token to partner with. For others, it might not. And that stuff is changing, right? So there's the render token, which is interesting because one of our projects we think will lend itself to be an animated series, which could naturally work well using a token that has visual graphics processing fundamental to the value of the token, right? So just figuring out how to put together projects. It's kind of packaging, but in a different way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said earlier because it really resonates with me. I've often thought of it like that in terms of what would if we were starting this company in 2028 or 2027. Actually, it was 2026 last year. So 5 years from now, what would it look like? And it's actually that exact same framework that I thought about, and then suddenly things start becoming somewhat clearer because you're still probably going to be a long way off, but at least you can start thinking in that direction. And you realize that, look, if things have moved from where we were 5 years ago to now, it's only going to be 2x of that, I think, now and 5 years from now. So yeah,
the change is happening, right? And like most disruptive change, it sort of academic or feels like it won't ever happen. And then suddenly it happens, right? And that's kind of how streaming hit the town. It was suddenly like, holy shit, everybody moved to streaming, right? It didn't happen overnight. I mean, Netflix has been around for a decade, so it's been, the writing's been on the wall, but when it hits, it feels like it just comes out of nowhere. And I think Web3, the people have been working on the blockchain. There are people who have been working on it for 7, 8, 9 years. It's been at work for a long time. It's just suddenly capturing a lot of the public imagination, right?
Yeah. And like everything, you have the hype cycles, right? And you look at VR, for example, it's gone through 4 of them, I think, and then there's a lot of talk, and then the infrastructure and the technology hasn't really caught up to the imagination. And then that happens behind the scenes. Everyone's like, oh yeah, it's dead. No one's doing it. But there's billions of dollars being poured into it behind the scenes, just not in the public consciousness that much, right? And then it catches up, and that's when it happens. I'm still, the whole Netflix thing. I remember when I, through VPN, I started, we had a Netflix subscription, and it would take just because I wanted to do it because Netflix existed. And, this was before we had really high speed internet. It was fast, but not that fast. And Netflix servers were not that good either. And so it would take 3 hours to watch an episode of House of Cards. And it was very painful.
It was just buffering or...
Yeah. So this has been a mind-blowing conversation, Sanjay. And I'd love to go on for, I don't know if do you listen, are you a Tim Ferriss fan?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Have you heard the conversation with Balaji? He's had a few, but there's a 4 or 5 hour one from a few months ago, and they just go on and on and on. And you know what? The crazy part is you don't get bored. You can listen to that for 10 hours.
Balaji can talk. He's smart. He's a smart guy.
Yeah, that's an aspiration to be kind of to get there. I feel like you're not that I'm Tim Ferriss, but you're like the Balaji in this equation, and it sounds like we could do this for another 2 hours, but we won't for now. Maybe we'll do another conversation down the line. Also, what's really
share your listeners.
Yeah, exactly. What's interesting is that we talked a little bit about you talked about your relationship with Imagine, and I realized that you're the second person we have on in our short lifespan as a podcast on Flux Navigators who has something to do with Imagine, because we had Tyler Mitchell on from Impact, which is also incubated by Imagine, Ron and Brian on as co-founders over there, right?
That's right. Tyler is fantastic. And yeah, what they're doing at Impact, we were literally incubating the same year, so we shared office space together, and as part of that effort. And they're he and his team are fantastic, and what they're doing is very, very cool. So
absolutely, yeah. So we're going to wrap with a couple of things that I like to ask my guests, and the first one is, what are you reading, listening to, or watching right now or in the past year that you feel you absolutely have to share with the audience?
Reading, listening, or watching. So I listen to the Pivot podcast a lot. Less so these days. It feels like it's starting to like talk about random stuff a lot. And then in music, I've been listening to the new Baby Keem album, and then Pusha T just dropped a single a few days ago called Diet Coke, which I've probably listened to like 50 times in the last 72 hours. What am I watching? I have been watching the After Party on Apple Plus. Chris, the Lord and Miller show, which took a minute to get into. And at first I was kind of like, I don't know if it's my thing, even though I love them and I love the cast. But then I heard an interview with them where they were talking about the show and how it's like Rashomon style. Every episode is different. And then I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So then I got back into it. I didn't realize that earlier. And now I'm halfway through it. And I think it's very good. Our sister Tia Sarkar is in there, so shouts to Tia. And then, but what am I watching that has been like fantastic? I might have to get back to you. I feel like I've seen something. I've got to have seen something that's like, oh my god. But I don't know. I haven't loved the current Oscar noms. I think I probably liked Dune the most. I liked everything. It was all good, but nothing that was like, oh my god, I gotta write home about it. And then I'm reading Iger's book right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Ride of a Lifetime. Yeah.
I have it. I haven't read it yet. Actually, I think I'm supposed. Oh, thank you. I actually have it on Audible. I need to listen to it. I'm currently listening to Brian Cox's book. Yeah, it's really good because it's in his voice.
It is? Oh, that's great.
It's great. It's super entertaining. I've been working out to it for the past week or so.
Oh, that's cool. The book that I think it's a couple of years old now, but that's on my next list that I think your audience will dig if they're into like film and TV and stuff is the Duplass brothers book.
Oh,
it's called Like Brothers, maybe. Actually, Karan Soni, who you might know, the actor, recommended it, and so I got it, and I've just started. I've like flipped through it, and it's like, oh, I gotta make real time. This isn't one you want to listen to the audiobook on 1.4, which the Iger book I'm listening to on 1.4, but this is one you want to sit down and really read because it's like emotional and it's about their relationship as brothers, and it touches on like their creativity and the film business, but it's really just a deeper book than that. So I think that seems like a high recommendation. So
awesome. Well, thank you for that.
And those guys are Louisiana guys. So
oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, they're New Orleans guys. So
I had no idea. That's great. Thank you for sharing that with our listeners. And I'm going to end with a question, hat tip to Tim Ferriss, because I haven't been original enough to think of a closing question. If you could put your message on a billboard to the world, what would that be?
Ooh, put your message on a billboard to the world. I think it would be stay in the margin. Let the center come to you.
I love it. I knew it was going to be that. I knew it.
Look like this.
It wouldn't even be on the billboard.
Yeah, you're outside the billboard.
Right? Exactly. That's good.
Be your own center of gravity. Change gravity.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that would be really cool about how you have these innovative formats for ads or something where you actually have a little extension to the billboard with the message there. So
right.
Nice. Well, this has been awesome, Sanjay. We should do this again sometime. And anyways, you and I are talking about possibly working together on a few things. So we'll continue the conversation maybe this week or later in next week or later in the month. So I will speak to you soon. And be well.
Thanks for having me, man. Great to talk to you again, as always. Thank you, brother.
Absolutely.
Khuda Hafiz. Ram Ram.